I of course understand that Israel, I'm sure, has a part of their kind of national psyche that views the Iranians as their gravest threat and obviously doesn't want them to have nuclear weapons, in part out of fear that they're going to use it. But I think the bigger fear in both Israel and the United States about Iran getting nuclear weapons is that if Iran became a nuclear state, Israel would no longer be able to completely dominate the region as they've been doing. I mean, we've seen over the last few years, not just Gaza, not just the West Bank. They just bombed Syria again this week. They took credit for the regime change there. They took land from Lebanon and bombed, obviously, Lebanon repeatedly over the last several years. They bombed Yemen, and now they just bombed Iran. So basically, they can do whatever they want because of their military superiority. It's been the policy of Washington to ensure that Israel maintains military superiority in that region. So I get the concern about Iran having nuclear weapons because they might use them. That's, you want to have fewer rather than more countries having nuclear weapons, I guess. But isn't the bigger fear that if Iran gets them, Israel would lose its ability to just bully the entire region and ultimately control the entire region as well?
Well, I think there's no question that Israel is in a position militarily now where it can act as a bully in the region. And we don't want to underestimate the importance of Israel's alliance with the United States. I mean, the two of them act as a tag team in the region. And that's a huge force multiplier for the Israelis. I have a slightly different view of this than you do. And I believe that if you go back to the period after Israel was created, the Israelis have had a deep-seated interest in basically wrecking all of their Arab neighbors. What's happening now to Syria, or what's happened to Syria over the past year and a half, is what the Israelis would like to do to Iran. They want to fracture their neighbors, break them apart if possible. When the Israelis talk about regime change in Iran, they're talking about more than regime change. They want to break Iran into constituent parts. The Israelis, for example, have had a deep-seated interest in creating a Kurdish state. And I've always wondered why the Israelis were interested in creating a Kurdish state and paying so much attention to Kurdish nationalism. It's because if you created a Kurdish state, you would break apart Iraq, Iran, Syria, and even Turkey. And this has long been their goal. It's a divide and conquer policy. So I think it's just important to understand that they do want to be the most powerful state in the region, as you were alluding to. But it's more than that. They believe that the way to do that is to be joined at the hip with the United States, number one. Number two, be the only state in the region that has nuclear weapons. Number three, be by far the most powerful conventional force in the region. And number four, break apart their rivals or put their rivals in a position where they're heavily dependent on the United States. This is what they've done with Jordan and with Egypt. Jordan and Egypt have hardly any maneuver room vis-a-vis Israel because they're economically dependent on Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam has told them that if they challenge Israel in any way, the United States will make them pay economically. So that's how you deal with Egypt and Jordan. And with countries like Syria, countries like Lebanon, countries like Iran, countries like Iraq, the basic goal there is to wreck those countries, to break them apart, to make them dysfunctional. And that's the second goal. That's the regime change goal when you dig down deep.
So let me ask you about that then. Were there significant advances made in this bombing campaign that was pretty intense and pretty heavy in Iran, principally by Israel, but also by the United States, in terms of destabilizing and wrecking that country? Or do you think the government of Iran emerges still pretty strong and very difficult to dislodge? People have been trying to dislodge them for 45 years, since 1979, and they haven't gone anywhere. How do you see their strength and whether they've been sufficiently weakened and destabilized?
All the evidence, Glenn, is that the bombing campaign by Israel against Iran, which started, of course, on June 13th, has had exactly the opposite effect in terms of the leadership of Iran. The hardliners have taken over. The Revolutionary Guards are in control more than they ever were. The Ayatollah Khamenei has been weakened because he's been forced to basically go into hiding, and he's not in a position where he can command the country in any meaningful way. And furthermore, all the evidence is that the people are rallying around the flag. And we have a rich history of this happening every time a country launches a bombing campaign against another country for the purposes of regime change. We have a rich historical record here, and there is not a single instance, I want to emphasize, not a single instance where bombing from the air alone has caused regime change. And all the evidence is that it causes a rally around the flag effect. So the idea that the Israelis are going to cause regime change with their air campaign is not a serious argument. And if you look at what's happened over the past 12 days, it has not turned out that the country is on the verge of regime change. If anything, the regime is in a better situation today than it was on June 12th, the day before the campaign started. So this is a failure.
I think if Israelis and other advocates of regime change in Iran heard you say that, I've seen them do this before, that they would point to the counterexample of Libya, where, and Netanyahu specifically cited Gaddafi as the model he wanted Iran to follow. Imagine hearing that, like, oh, I think the model we should give to Iran and make them follow is the one Gaddafi followed, which of course led to not just regime change, but him being raped to death on the street by a gang of madmen. And there, I think you can make the argument, can't you, that we did actually succeed in destroying the regime solely through a bombing campaign?
No, what happened there is that you had a ground war, right? We didn't have to invade, but we had proxies who had gone to war against Gaddafi, and we then came in with air power. But here the argument is that you come in with air power, there's no revolution, there's no war on the ground, and air power precipitates a revolution. That doesn't happen. Again, to go back to the Libya case, the revolution had already started. There was, or the rebellion, call it what you want, and there was a huge ground war taking place. And that's when air power came in. And in those sorts of circumstances, you can do it, but not in this case.
I mean,
you want to remember.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you want to remember we had to invade Iraq.
Right.
We could not do regime change in Iraq from the air. Otherwise, we would have done it. Remember shock and awe? We went in with shock and awe. That didn't lead to regime change. We had to go in, conquer the country, and then spend months looking for Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, and I remember the night of the Israeli bombing, or the second night, when we heard all these great stories about precise decapitations of the entire Iranian military commander structure, that, oh, this was designed to ensure that the Iranians would be so overwhelmed by the show of force that they would essentially submit. And it was the same thing, shock and awe. We're going to shock and awe them into submission. And as you noted, that certainly didn't happen. But let me just ask you, in terms of, because one of the concerns I have is that although this part of the war for the moment has ended, meaning there's no more planes flying or missiles flying over Iran and killing people and destroying things, I can't believe that regime change is not still very much in the minds of many, many people in Washington and Tel Aviv. President Trump today said he didn't want regime change. He thinks the chaos that it would cause would be nowhere near worth the price. But you certainly have the U.S. and Israel funding various factions. You have the MEK, other factions that are loyal to the Mossad or to the CIA or to the MI6 that. And I guess my question to you is, compared to Libya, are those significant? Are they, those kinds of militias and proxies, capable of fighting a meaningful ground war to bring about regime change if they also have the air cover from Israel and the U.S.?
Well, the fact is that they have not been able to do it up to now. And after what's happened over the past 12 days, the regime has every incentive to crack down on those groups and make sure that they can't cause any trouble. Now, can I say with 100% certainty that there won't be an uprising in 6 months or 12 months? No, I can't. It's very hard to say how this plays out over time inside of Iran. But the fact is that there is no evidence now of an uprising. And you also have a regime that has powerful incentives to make sure that that remains the case for the foreseeable future. So I don't think you're going to get regime change. But Glenn, then the question pops up, what happens if you do get regime change? What's the happy ending here? Are you telling me that we're going to get a new regime that is going to say, we don't want nuclear weapons. We don't want to cause Israel or the United States any trouble in the region. And we're going to behave ourselves according to the dictates of Israel. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, the dream is to get the Shah's son, who was a puppet of the U.S. and Israel, back into power in Iran. He's going to fly from Paris or whatever and be welcomed with open arms by the Iranians. And I think you see he's being treated almost as like Juan Guaido, you know, the legitimate president of Iran, or the monarch of Iran, by multiple Western media outlets, and that clearly is the plan. You know, they had that Ahmed Shalabi, too, was going to take over Iraq and be so welcomed despite not having lived in Iraq for 40 years. That is the vision.
That is the vision. And if you believe that, I have a bridge I want to sell you. This is not going to happen. I would also point out to you, of course, when the revolution in Iran took place in 1979, it was the Shah who was overthrown. The Shah had an ambitious nuclear program, and the Shah was committed to acquiring nuclear weapons. And the reason is that it makes sense from Iran's point of view to have nuclear weapons. You know, Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel and former defense minister as well, once said that he believed that Iran was pursuing nuclear weapons because it made so much sense. Just think about that statement. He, of course, is a very smart man, and he is correct. It makes eminently good sense for Iran to have nuclear weapons. I have said on numerous occasions in public that if I had been the Iranian national security advisor, they would have nuclear weapons today. I mean, the lesson of the past 12 days is that Iran was foolish not to get nuclear weapons, in my opinion. And the lesson now is to go out and get nuclear weapons, because if you had nuclear weapons, the Israelis and the Americans would not attack you. So I would just say that even if you get the Shah's son in power in Iran, I bet a lot of money that after a short period of time, he'd be very interested in building nuclear weapons because, again, it makes good strategic sense.